The kind of cold that settles into Route 66 country in late November isn't the dramatic cold of mountains or the wet cold of coastlines. It's a flat, indifferent cold that comes in off the high desert plains without announcement, seeping through fabric and skin and bone like it has nowhere better to be, and all the time in the world to get there. Sarah Reeves had been walking for 40 minutes. She knew it was 40 minutes because she'd been counting her steps since the gas station attendant at the last stop, a teenager who looked at her like she was a ghost, told her Dolan was 3 miles up the road. She'd calculated 45 minutes at her pace, maybe 50 with the bag. The bag was heavy. It was a black canvas medical bag, worn at the corners, the strap mended twice with different thread. It contained her stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff, 2 tourniquets, suture kit, trauma scissors, a small pharmacological reference she'd carried since nursing school, and 4 prescription bottles she was no longer authorized to dispense. She could have left it at the Greyhound station in Flagstaff when she sold her phone to cover the ticket. She could have left it at the rest stop outside Seligman when the connecting bus never came. She could have left it at the bus station when the teenager told her there was no taxi in Dolan and the next bus didn't come through until Thursday. She hadn't left it. Some things you carry not because they're practical, but because they're the last thing that tells you who you are. The road ahead was dark except for the occasional amber wash of a distant streetlight. She could see the outline of Dolan now. A water tower, a cluster of lights, the skeletal silhouette of a neon sign she couldn't yet read. Population 1,200, the sign at the county line had said. She'd passed that sign in the dark without stopping. She was wearing scrubs under a fleece jacket. The fleece had been adequate for Arizona in October. It was not adequate for this. Her fingers, wrapped around the bag's handle, had gone past cold into something that felt like pressure without sensation. She switched the bag to her other hand and tucked the numb one under her arm and kept walking. Behind her, maybe a quarter mile back, she heard an engine. Not a car engine. Lower. More deliberate. She didn't turn around. If you've ever been a woman alone on a dark road, you understand the calculation that happens in the first second, the quick inventory of options, the measurement of distance to the nearest light, the decision about whether to turn and see or to keep your eyes forward and your pace steady. Sarah kept her eyes forward. She adjusted the bag strap on her shoulder. She walked. The engine got closer, and then it slowed. If you've ever had your life change in a single moment, not dramatically, not with music swelling or the sky cracking open, but just quietly, in the dark, on a road that smelled like creosote and old asphalt, then you know what the next 30 seconds were. Stay with me, because this is where it begins. The motorcycle was a dark burgundy Road King, the kind of bike that doesn't announce itself. No chrome overkill, no aftermarket exhaust screaming for attention. Just a well-maintained machine ridden by someone who'd long since stopped needing to prove anything with noise. Cole Navarro had been riding this stretch of road for 23 years. He knew every crack in the asphalt, every mile marker, every place the shoulder dropped off into gravel without warning. He knew where the coyotes crossed at dusk, and where the truckers pulled over to sleep, and where the teenagers from the high school sometimes parked on Friday nights, looking at the stars and pretending they weren't scared of the future. He had never, in 23 years, seen a woman walking into Dolan carrying a medical bag at 11:30 on a Tuesday night in November. He slowed without thinking about it. Not a dramatic stop. Just the natural deceleration of someone who has seen something that doesn't fit the pattern and whose brain is already asking questions before his hands have finished processing the signal. She didn't turn around. He pulled up alongside her and matched her pace for a moment, and he could see her clearly then in the ambient glow of his headlight. The scrubs, the fleece jacket that was doing nothing against this cold, the bag, the deliberate set of her shoulders that said she was aware of him and had decided to keep walking anyway. "Dolan's still a mile out," he said. She kept walking. "I know. It's 34 degrees. I know that too." Cole looked at her hands. One was white-knuckled around the bag strap. The other was tucked under her arm. He'd done enough miles in cold weather to recognize what that meant. "You got family in Dolan?" A pause. "No." "You got a place to stay?" Another pause, shorter this time. "I'll figure it out." Cole had spent 41 years on this earth and built 2 companies from nothing and ridden through 43 states and sat with 3 of his closest friends while they died. 1 from an accident, 2 from the kind of slow damage that catches up with men who lived hard and didn't ask for help soon enough. He had learned, across all of that, to recognize the particular sound of someone who has run out of options, but hasn't run out of pride. He knew what that sounded like because he had sounded like it himself, once a long time ago on a different road. "There's a diner on Main," he said. "Lila keeps it open till midnight. Hot coffee, hot food." He paused. "I'm not going to follow you. I'm just telling you where it is." She stopped walking. He stopped the bike. She turned and looked at him for the first time, and Cole Navarro saw a woman in her mid-30s with dark circles under her eyes and a jaw set so hard it looked like it might crack, and hands that were shaking slightly, not from fear, he thought, but from cold and exhaustion and the particular tremor that comes from holding yourself together for too long. She looked at him the way people look at something they want very badly but have learned not to trust. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you're freezing," Cole said. "And because nobody should walk into Dolan alone at midnight with nowhere to go." A long moment passed. The desert wind moved between them. "I can give you a ride," he said. "Or I can just tell you where the diner is and ride ahead and leave you alone. Either way, Lila's is 2 lefts off the main road, and she makes the best green chili in 3 counties. Sarah Reeves looked at this man on his burgundy motorcycle. The weathered face, the calm eyes, the complete absence of urgency in his voice, and made the calculation that women make in the dark when they're out of alternatives. She got on the bike. "Before we go any further, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. This story is just getting started." Lila's Diner had been on the corner of Main and 2nd in Dolan, Arizona since 1971. The sign still said Lila's in the original cursive, though the current Lila was the granddaughter of the original one and had inherited both the diner and the name through a family tradition that nobody in town questioned anymore. The booths were red vinyl, patched in 4 places with electrical tape. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead and served in mugs the size of small bowls. The green chili was, as advertised, the best in 3 counties. It was also, at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, almost empty. Cole held the door, and Sarah walked in ahead of him. The warmth hit her like a physical thing. She stopped just inside the entrance and stood still for a moment, and Cole watched her eyes close briefly. Just a second. Just long enough for her body to register that it was safe to stop bracing against the cold. Lila herself, mid-50s, silver-streaked hair, an expression that had seen everything Dolan had to offer and remained unimpressed, looked up from behind the counter. "Cole," she said. "Lila." He nodded toward Sarah. "She walked in from the Seligman Road. Can you get her something hot?" Lila's eyes moved over Sarah with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had fed hungry people for 30 years and could assess a situation in under 5 seconds. "Sit down, honey," she said. "I'll bring you soup." Sarah sat in the booth nearest the heater. Cole sat across from her, not close, not hovering, just present. He ordered coffee for both of them without asking, and Lila brought it in those enormous mugs along with a bowl of pozole that steamed in the diner air. Sarah wrapped both hands around the mug. For a while she did not speak, and Cole didn't push. He'd learned that there was a particular kind of silence that needed to be respected. The silence of someone recalibrating, getting their bearings, deciding how much to say to a stranger who had been kind without obvious reason. He drank his coffee and looked out the window at the empty main street of Dolan, the Route 66. Shield on the old motel across the road had lost its number. Just the white shield shape remained, glowing faintly against the dark. "Sarah," she said finally. He looked at her. "My name, Sarah Reeves." "Cole Navarro." She nodded, drank some soup. The trembling in her hands was subsiding. "You live here? In Dolan?" "Born here," he said. "Left when I was 19. Came back when I was 31. "Why'd you come back?" It was a direct question, the kind people asked when they were too tired for small talk. Cole appreciated that. "Because it needed someone to come back," he said simply. Sarah looked at him for a moment, then looked back at her soup. Outside, a truck passed on the highway, its lights sweeping briefly across the diner window. "I was a nurse," she said. "Emergency department. 8 years. Was." Cole noted the past tense but didn't comment on it. "I'm good at it," she continued, and there was something fierce in her voice when she said it. Not pride exactly, something more like insistence, like she was arguing with someone who wasn't in the room. "I'm very good at it." "I believe you," Cole said. She looked at him. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But you walked 3 miles in 34 degrees carrying a medical bag instead of leaving it somewhere easier. That tells me something." Something shifted in her expression. Not softened exactly. More like she registered that he had actually looked at her instead of just seeing a situation to manage. She told him then, in the flat, careful voice of someone who has told a story enough times to drain most of the feeling out of it. The hospital in Phoenix. The chief of medicine, Dr. Paulson, who had a reputation and a pattern and a tenure that made him untouchable. The night he'd cornered her in the supply room. The formal complaint she'd filed. The investigation that found insufficient evidence. The shift assignments that changed. The colleagues who stopped meeting her eyes in the hallway. The performance review that materialized 6 months later, documenting issues that had never been mentioned before. The termination. The nursing board inquiry that followed, triggered by an anonymous complaint. "They didn't revoke my license," she said. But there's a flag on my file. Any hospital that looks me up sees it. And they all look. She paused. I've applied to 47 positions in 14 months. Cole was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the old diner windows in their frames. Where were you going? He asked. Sarah looked at the bag beside her on the bench. There's a community health clinic in Kingman. I heard they were understaffed. I thought maybe a smaller operation wouldn't check as carefully. She paused. I know how that sounds. It sounds like someone trying to keep doing the work they're meant to do, Cole said. She looked at him. Dolan has a medical situation, he said. Has had one for about 4 years. The clinic closed when the last doctor retired and nobody replaced her. Nearest emergency care is 40 minutes away. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. I've been trying to fix it. Haven't managed yet. Sarah was very still. What kind of fix? The right kind. A proper facility, staffed, stocked, sustainable. He met her eyes. I have the building. I have the funding. I don't have the people. You're offering me a job, Sarah said slowly. I'm telling you the situation, Cole said. What you do with that information is up to you. She studied him across the table. The diner hummed around them. The refrigerator unit. The low radio Lila kept behind the counter. The occasional distant sound of the highway. Why would you trust me? Sarah asked. You don't know what's in my file. I know what you told me, Cole said. And I know that men like the one you described don't corner nurses in supply rooms because those nurses gave them any reason to. They do it because they can. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it. Not anger exactly, but the particular steadiness of a man who has thought carefully about certain things. I've known men like that. I know what their version of events sounds like. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I'd need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Cole said. He reached into his jacket and put a business card on the table. Plain white card, just a name and a number. There's a room at the motel across the street. I'll cover tonight. No obligation attached to that. I'd do it for anyone walking in out of that cold. He stood, left cash on the table for the food, nodded to Lila. Cole, Sarah said. He paused. Why do you still live here? She asked. If you have the money to build a medical clinic, you have the money to live anywhere. Cole looked at her for a moment. Because the people here are worth staying for, he said. And because I promised someone I would. He walked out into the cold Arizona night. Sarah sat in the booth for a long time after he left, her hands wrapped around the cooling coffee mug, looking at the plain white card on the red vinyl table. Cole Navarro's story in Dolan was the kind that got compressed by retelling until only the dramatic version remained. The boy who left with nothing, built an empire, came back. What got lost in the compression was everything in between, the years of it, the particular texture of building something from the kind of nothing that is also the wrong color and the wrong name in the wrong zip code. He'd grown up in Dolan in a house that needed more work than his father ever had time to give it, with a mother who cleaned rooms at the Route 66 Motor Inn, and a father who worked the highway maintenance crew until the accident that took 2 fingers on his right hand and most of his willingness to try. Cole had left at 19 with his motorcycle, $400, and a mechanical aptitude that turned out to be worth considerably more than anyone in Dolan had ever suggested. The first shop he opened in Tucson fixed bikes. The second one, 5 years later, sold them. The third one, in Phoenix, was a dealership. By the time he was 35, he had 7 locations across 3 states, a manufacturing partnership that put his name on a limited edition frame series, and a reputation in the motorcycle industry that had been built one honest transaction at a time. He came back to Dolan at 31, 6 years before the last of the expansion, because his mother called him to tell him that Dolan was dying, and he was the only one she knew who might be able to do something about it. He bought the old hardware store on Main. He renovated the motel. He funded the school's music program. He kept his house, the same house he'd grown up in, though he'd rebuilt it almost entirely with his own hands over the course of several winters. The town knew all of this. The town also knew that Cole Navarro had been married once, briefly, to a woman named Diane who had loved him, but not Dolan, and that the divorce had been quiet and without bitterness, and that he had not seriously pursued anyone since. The town had opinions about this, as small towns do, but Cole had long since learned to let the opinions of Dolan wash over him like weather. Present, noted, and not especially actionable. What the town did not know, what he had told almost no one, was that the reason he'd started the medical clinic project was a man named Ray Guzman. Ray had been his first employee at the Tucson shop, a mechanic of extraordinary instinct, a man who could diagnose an engine problem by sound, the way some people read music. He'd also been Cole's closest friend for 11 years, the kind of friend who exists only a few times in a life if you're lucky. Ray had been living in Dolan when the chest pains started, was driving himself to the hospital 40 minutes away when his heart stopped on the highway. He was found 2 hours later. 40 minutes. 40 minutes was the difference. Cole had been sitting with that math for 4 years. Sarah Reeves woke in the motel room across from Lila's at 7:15 to thin winter light coming through the curtain gap, and the distant sound of a rooster somewhere in the direction of what she would later learn was Dolan's single remaining working farm. She lay still for a moment, doing the inventory that had become automatic in the past 14 months. Where she was, what she had, what came next. Where she was, a clean, small room in a motel in a town she'd never heard of before yesterday. What she had, her bag, her clothes, her license with its flag, and a plain white card with a name and a number. What came next? She didn't know. She showered. She changed into the spare set of scrubs she kept in the bag for exactly this kind of situation. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the card. Cole Navarro. Just the name and the number. She thought about Kingman. She thought about the 47 applications. She thought about the supply room in Phoenix and the HR meeting, and the way her supervisor had looked at the wall just above her head during the whole termination conversation, like eye contact was something he could no longer afford to give her. She thought about a man who had looked at her across a diner table and said, "I know what their version of events sounds like." She picked up the motel phone and dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Navarro, I'd like to see the building," she said. The building was on Carrillo Street, half a block off Main, in what had been a veterinary clinic before Doc Ames retired and moved to Sedona. It was larger than Sarah expected. A reception area, 4 examination rooms, a procedure room with proper ventilation, a small lab space, and a back office. Cole had gut-renovated the interior over the past 18 months. The walls were clean drywall, not yet painted. The floors were new tile. The lighting was proper medical-grade fluorescent. The equipment bays were empty. "I've been waiting to order equipment until I knew who'd be using it," Cole said, standing in the procedure room doorway. "Didn't want to make assumptions about what a nurse would need versus a doctor." Sarah walked the room slowly. She tested the procedure table. Solid, properly mounted. She checked the ventilation. She looked at the electrical panel that had been upgraded for medical equipment loads. She stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, taking it in. "You did this work yourself?" she asked. "Most of it. Had help with the electrical and the plumbing." She looked at him. "Why hasn't this opened yet?" "Because a building without the right person in it is just a building," Cole said. "I've had 3 conversations with nurses over the past 2 years. One took a better-paying position in Flagstaff. One came out, looked at the town, and left the next day. One lasted 6 weeks before deciding rural medicine wasn't what she'd expected." Sarah was quiet, still looking at the room. "What would the arrangement be?" she asked. Cole leaned against the doorframe. "Salary, not hourly. Competitive with what you'd make in Phoenix, maybe better. Full equipment budget. You specify, I order. The clinic operates as a non-profit. There's a board, but I chair it, and I'd want you on it. Housing is the apartment above the old hardware store. It's finished. It's yours if you want it. 6-month trial period. Mutual. Either party can end it." He paused. "And your file doesn't concern me. What concerns me is whether you want to do this work." Sarah turned and looked at him directly. "You looked me up." "Yes. And?" "And I read what I expected to read," Cole said. "A formal complaint, an investigation that found nothing, and a performance review that appeared 6 months after the complaint. I've seen that pattern before." His voice was level. "I'm not asking you to explain it to me. I'm telling you it doesn't change anything on my end." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Outside, through the clinic's front window, she could see a slice of Main Street. The old hardware store Cole had bought. The diner, the motel, the faded Route 66 shield. A woman was walking a dog. A man was unlocking the door of what looked like a barbershop. The town moved at the pace of a place that had learned to move slowly because there was nowhere particular to be. "Who was the person you promised?" Sarah asked. Cole looked at her. "Last night you said you stayed because you promised someone you would," she said. "Who was it?" A pause. "A friend. Ray Guzman. He died 4 years ago." He looked at the empty equipment bays. 40 minutes from Dolan to the nearest hospital. He didn't make it. Sarah was quiet. "I told him once, years ago, that Dolan needed a clinic and I'd build one someday," Cole said. "He told me to stop talking about someday." He looked at her. "I'm still working on that." Sarah Reeves stood in the center of an empty procedure room in a town she'd never heard of and thought about the last 14 months. The applications. The phone calls that ended before they began. The slow erosion of being told, in 47 different ways, that what happened to her had somehow made her less. She thought about the bag she'd carried 3 miles in the cold, because some things you carry not because they're practical, but because they're the last thing that tells you who you are. 6 months, she said. Trial period, Mutual. Cole nodded. And I want input on all equipment decisions. It's your clinic, he said. Your call. She extended her hand. He shook it. His grip was firm and brief and exactly what it needed to be. When can I start? She asked. Equipment arrives in 2 weeks, Cole said. That gives you time to get settled and meet people. A pause. Dolan takes a minute to warm up to strangers. But when it does, it stays warm. Sarah looked out the window at the slow morning movement of Main Street. I've been a stranger everywhere for 14 months, she said quietly. I can handle a minute. The apartment above the hardware store had high ceilings and west-facing windows that caught the late afternoon light and turned it gold. There was a kitchen with a gas range, a bedroom with a good mattress, and a living room where Sarah set up her small collection of medical texts on the built-in shelves and arranged the 4 prescription bottles she still kept in her bag on the bathroom counter, where she could see them every morning and remember what she was working toward. She met Dolan slowly, the way you meet a place that has been watching you before you started watching it. Lila from the diner brought food the second evening, not as a gesture, just set it on the counter and said, "You look like someone who forgets to eat when they're working," and left without waiting for thanks. The man from the barbershop, whose name was Gerald, and who had been cutting hair in Dolan for 38 years, stopped her on Main Street to ask about the clinic with the directness of a man who had no patience for preamble. The woman with the dog, whose name was Pat, and whose dog was named Senator, knocked on the clinic door one afternoon to ask if Sarah could look at an infected cut on Senator's paw. And when Sarah gently explained she was a human nurse, not a veterinary one, Pat looked at her for a moment and said, "Well, a cut is a cut." And Sarah looked at it anyway. Dolan was 1,200 people who had been watching their town shrink for 20 years and had developed, as a result, a particular attitude toward anyone who arrived with the apparent intention of staying. Skeptical, watchful, not unwelcoming, just careful with their welcome, having given it to people before who left. Cole appeared at the clinic most mornings, not intrusively, but consistently, checking on equipment installation, answering contractor questions, occasionally bringing 2 coffees from Lila's, and setting one on Sarah's desk without ceremony. They had developed, without discussing it, an easy professional rhythm. He asked practical questions. She gave direct answers. Neither of them performed politeness at the expense of efficiency. It was during those morning coffee conversations that Sarah began to understand what Cole Navarro actually was, which was different from what he appeared to be. He appeared to be a wealthy man doing a good deed for his hometown. What he actually was, she came to understand, was a man who had built everything he had in direct response to a specific kind of grief, the grief of watching a place you love diminish because nobody with resources cared enough to stay. His businesses weren't abstract financial achievements. They were the means by which he could come back. He talked about Dolan the way some people talk about a difficult patient, with unflinching awareness of the problems and absolute refusal to give up on the outcome. One morning, 3 weeks after the equipment arrived, and 2 days before the clinic's soft opening, Sarah looked up from the intake forms she was organizing to find Cole standing in the procedure room doorway with coffee, looking at the room with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. "What?" she asked. "Ray would have liked this," he said quietly. Sarah set down the forms. "Tell me about him." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he came in and sat in the chair by the wall, the one meant for patients' family members. And he talked about Ray Guzman for the first time in a long time to someone who actually wanted to hear it. The way he could diagnose an engine problem by sound. The way he laughed. The specific argument they'd had in 2015 about whether Dolan was worth saving that had ended with Ray saying, "You're going to do it anyway, so stop pretending you haven't already decided." Sarah listened. She asked questions. She didn't fill the silences he needed. When he was done, he looked at her with an expression that was almost surprised. "I don't talk about him much," he said. "I know," Sarah said. "You should." Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically. Just a small, incremental shift of the kind that accumulates over time into something significant. Cole picked up his coffee. "Clinic opens Friday," he said. "Clinic opens Friday," Sarah agreed. The soft opening of the Dolan Community Health Clinic was not, by any objective measure, a dramatic event. There was no ribbon cutting, no mayor's speech. Dolan's mayor was a retired schoolteacher named Hank, who preferred not to make speeches, and no crowd gathered to witness the moment. Just a sign in the window, a notice in the weekly paper, and Lila telling everyone who came into the diner for 3 days running that it was about time. The first patient was an 8-year-old named Marco, who had been dealing with an ear infection his mother had been managing with over-the-counter medication because the 40-minute drive to the nearest clinic was 40 minutes she didn't always have. Sarah examined him, confirmed the infection, and wrote the prescription that cleared it up in 5 days. Marco's mother cried briefly in the parking lot. Sarah pretended not to see because she understood that some moments need their privacy. The second patient was Gerald from the barbershop, whose blood pressure, when Sarah took it, was high enough to explain the headaches he'd been attributing to stress for 2 years. She started him on a management protocol and scheduled follow-ups. Gerald told everyone he knew, which in Dolan was essentially everyone. Within 3 weeks, the clinic had seen 64 patients. Within 6 weeks, Sarah had identified 4 cases of unmanaged diabetes, 2 of undiagnosed hypertension, 1 of a cardiac arrhythmia that she immediately referred to Flagstaff with the kind of urgency that probably saved a life, and 1 of something she was fairly certain was early-stage Lyme disease that had been misattributed to fatigue for the better part of a year. Dolan, it turned out, had been quietly accumulating medical problems for 4 years. Cole reviewed the statistics at the end of the second month, sitting across from Sarah in the clinic's small office, and was very quiet for a while. 4 years, he said. "I know," Sarah said. "If we'd opened this 4 years ago—" "We didn't," Sarah said. Not unkindly. "We're open now." Cole looked at her. There was something in his face that she'd seen before. The expression of a man recalibrating, adjusting the distance between where he thought he was and where he actually was. "You do that," he said. "Do what?" "Say the thing that stops the spiral." He picked up his coffee. "Ray used to do that." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You compare me to him sometimes." "Is that—" He stopped. "I'm sorry. I don't mean—" "I don't mind," Sarah said. "I take it as a compliment." She paused. "What was he like? Not the stories, just what was he like?" Cole thought about this seriously, the way he thought about most things. "Honest in a way that cost him sometimes," he said finally. loyal to a degree that wasn't always practical, and he saw things in people, not the surface things, the real things, before they were ready to be seen. Sarah held his gaze. That sounds like someone worth promising things to. The office was quiet. Outside, a car passed on Carrillo Street. The desert light came through the west window and settled across the desk between them. Sarah, Cole said. And the way he said her name was different from the way he'd been saying it for 2 months. Not professional, not careful, just direct. I know, she said quietly. I haven't. He stopped. Tried again. I'm not good at this. I'm good at building things and fixing things, and I'm not good at... Cole, she said. He looked at her. I walked 3 miles in the dark, carrying everything I had left, she said. I know how to recognize when something is worth the difficulty. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Have dinner with me, not coffee. Dinner. Yes, Sarah said. Outside, Dolan continued its slow afternoon. And in the clinic on Carrillo Street, something that had been building for 2 months finally acknowledged itself. They were careful about it, the way people are careful when the thing they're building is important enough to protect. They had dinner at Lila's twice a week, which Lila noted with an expression of complete unsurprise. They rode together on Sunday mornings when the clinic was closed, Cole on the Road King, Sarah on a borrowed Honda that she was quietly becoming more confident on. They talked the way people talk when they have both been lonely enough to stop taking good conversation for granted. She told him about Philadelphia, about her residency, about the particular quality of exhaustion that comes from emergency department work, and the particular quality of satisfaction that comes from it too. About her mother in Tucson, who she should call more. About the apartment in Phoenix she'd given up when the termination came, packing her things in boxes that fit into a single rental car. He told her about the first shop in Tucson, sleeping on a cot in the back for 6 months to keep overhead low. About the expansion that had happened faster than he was ready for, and the specific panic of being responsible for other people's livelihoods. About his father, who had died 3 years after Cole left Dolan, without either of them saying what needed to be said. About Diane, who had been good and kind and deserved someone who wasn't half in love with a failing town. About the night he got the call about Ray, which had been a Thursday in October, and how he'd sat in his truck in the parking lot of the Phoenix dealership for an hour before he could make himself drive. That was the week I started the clinic project, he said. They were sitting on the bench outside the clinic one evening in January, the town quiet around them, the sky enormous and clear above the Route 66 shield. Not immediately, but that week was when I stopped thinking about it as someday. Sarah looked at him. In the months since November, she had watched the lines of his face become familiar to her. The set of his jaw when he was thinking through a problem. The particular way he went still when he was really listening. The almost imperceptible softening around his eyes when something landed close to something he felt. He'd be annoyed that it took 4 years, she said. Cole almost smiled. He would have been furious. A pause. He would have liked you. Because I tell you the thing that stops the spiral? Because you carry your bag even when it would be easier not to, Cole said. Because you know who you are and you don't apologize for it. Sarah looked at the sky for a moment. "I almost left it," she said. "The bag. There were 3 different moments when leaving it would have made everything easier." She paused. "I don't know why I didn't." "I do," Cole said. She looked at him. "Because you're a nurse, Shuho," he said simply. "Not because it says so somewhere. Because it's what you are." Sarah Reeves, who had spent 14 months being told in 47 different ways that what she was had been damaged beyond usefulness, sat on a bench in a small Arizona town under an enormous January sky and felt something in her chest that had been braced for a very long time finally. Carefully. Ease. Cole reached over and took her hand. They sat like that for a while, the town of Dolan settling into its night around them, until Sarah said, "I think I'm staying past 6 months." "I know," Cole said. "You know?" "You rearranged the supply cabinet last week," he said. "People who are leaving don't rearrange supply cabinets." She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that surprised her, full and unguarded, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. Cole looked at her when she laughed, and his expression was the clearest she had ever seen it. The trouble came in March, on a Wednesday, which is, as anyone who has ever had their life disrupted will confirm, exactly the kind of unremarkable day that disruption tends to choose. His name was Dr. Marcus Paulson, and he arrived in Dolan in a rented sedan with Arizona Medical Board credentials and an official inquiry notice that accused Sarah Reeves of practicing medicine beyond the scope of her nursing license. Sarah heard about it from Lila, who heard about it from Gerald, who had been getting his hair cut when the rented sedan pulled up outside the clinic, and a man in a suit got out carrying a briefcase. She knew who it was before she saw him. There is a particular quality to the dread of someone whose past has caught up with them. Not surprise exactly, more like the grim confirmation of something you'd been half expecting since the day you stopped running. Sarah set down the patient file she was reviewing and straightened her back and walked out to the reception area. Paulson was 53 now, grayer than she remembered, with the kind of face that had learned to arrange itself into expressions of professional concern while the eyes behind it calculated. He looked at her with those calculating eyes and said, "Ms. Reeves, or is it still Miss?" "Nurse Reeves," Sarah said. "What can I do for you, Dr. Paulson?" What he could do, he explained, in the measured tones of a man who had done this kind of thing before and believed in the performance of reasonableness, was submit to an inquiry into her clinical practices. There had been complaints, he said, concerns about the scope of treatment being provided at a clinic without physician oversight. Sarah listened. Her face was very still. "Complaints from whom?" she asked. "That's confidential," Paulson said, "as you know." What happened next happened quickly. Cole had been at the hardware store across the street when Lila called him. He walked into the clinic to find Sarah standing in her reception area, across from a man in a suit, and he read the situation in approximately 3 seconds. He stood in the doorway and looked at Paulson. "Can I help you?" Paulson looked at Cole, the well-worn jacket, the absence of a suit, the complete lack of any visible sign of wealth, and made an assessment that would later prove to be the most expensive miscalculation of his career. "This is a private matter," he said. "It's my clinic," Cole said pleasantly. which makes it my business. What Paulson did not know and would soon discover was that Cole Navarro had spent 23 years building things in industries where people tried to take them apart, and had developed, as a result, very specific instincts about how to respond when someone showed up with a briefcase and a performance of official authority. He also had a lawyer in Phoenix who answered on the first ring. The inquiry hearing was held 3 weeks later in Flagstaff, which gave Cole 3 weeks to do what Cole Navarro did when confronted with a problem. Research it completely, prepare for every scenario, and bring every relevant resource to bear. The hearing room was smaller than Sarah had expected and fuller. Lila was there, though she hadn't told Sarah she was coming. Gerald was there. Marco's mother was there, with Marco, who was wearing his good shirt. The woman with the dog, Pat, was there without Senator, but with a written statement about the infected paw and what Sarah had said about being a human nurse before examining it anyway. The mother of the twins Sarah had assisted with through a complicated delivery in February was there with the twins. 61 patients in 3 months. 41 of them had submitted written statements. 14 had come in person. The board panel reviewed Sarah's credentials, her treatment protocols, her documentation. They reviewed the complaint, which had been filed by Dr. Marcus Paulson of Phoenix, who had a history with Sarah Reeves that the panel's research had not failed to uncover. They reviewed the records of his own disciplinary history, 2 formal complaints in the previous 4 years, both involving behavior toward female subordinates, both settled quietly. The panel also reviewed a letter from the Arizona Department of Health Services, which had been quietly contacted by Cole's lawyer, noting that Dolan had been operating without any medical facility for 4 years, and that the clinic on Carrillo Street represented a significant public health asset in an underserved rural community. Paulson's attorney made his presentation. It was thorough and professional. Then Gerald stood up without being asked and said, "I've been having headaches for 2 years and attributed them to stress. She found high blood pressure in 15 minutes. I'm on medication now, and I feel better than I have in years. I just thought you should know." The panel chair looked at Gerald for a moment and then at her notes. The deliberation took 45 minutes. "Nurse Reeves," the panel chair said, "your clinical documentation reflects sound nursing judgment and appropriate scope of practice. The complaint is found to be without merit. Furthermore, this panel is recommending that the flag on your file be reviewed for removal, given the nature of its origin and the evidence presented today." The room erupted. Sarah stood very still in the middle of it. The noise, the people, Gerald pumping his fist, Marco's mother crying again, and felt the particular sensation of a weight she had carried so long, she'd stopped noticing its full heaviness, finally, completely lifting. Cole was beside her. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand on her shoulder, briefly, and she reached up and covered it with her own. They drove back to Dolan in the late afternoon, the desert turning amber and purple around them. Cole on the road, King and Sarah beside him on the Honda she'd quietly stopped thinking of as borrowed. They stopped at the pull-off on the highway, where you could see the full sweep of the valley, the way the road ran straight to the horizon, the water tower of Dolan just visible in the middle distance. Cole cut his engine. Sarah cut hers. The silence of the high desert in late afternoon is a specific kind of silence, not empty, but full, resonant with everything that doesn't need to be said. "I want to stay," Sarah said. Not 6 months. Permanently. Cole looked at the valley. I know. I'm not saying it because of today, she said. I decided before today. I just hadn't said it out loud. I know that too, he said. He turned to look at her. I have something to say, and I want to say it correctly, so I'm going to take a minute. Sarah waited. He took the minute. Then he said, I built things my whole life to come back to a place that mattered. I thought that was the thing. The coming back. But I've been here 12 years, and I think what I was actually building toward was someone to come back to it with. Someone who sees what it is and doesn't need it to be something else. The sun was touching the edge of the mesa to the west. The light was extraordinary. I love you, Cole said. I'm not uncertain about it, and I'm not going to be careful about saying it, because I've been careful about too many things for too long. Sarah Reeves, who had walked into this town with a medical bag and a flagged file and 47 rejections and the particular stubborn knowledge of who she was, looked at this man who had built an entire community out of grief and loyalty and the refusal to let a promise become a someday. I love you too, she said. I've known for a while. How long? The day you told me Ray would have liked this, she said. The way you said it. Cole was quiet. Then, he would have. He really would have. The light continued to change around them, the way desert light does. Dramatic, unhurried, indifferent to human timing. Ask me, Sarah said. Cole looked at her. You've been thinking about asking me something for at least 3 weeks, she said. I've watched you decide not to say it 4 separate times. Ask me. Cole almost smiled. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and put something in her hand. A ring. Simple gold band, a single stone that caught the last of the sunset light. I had it in my pocket at the hearing, he said, in case you needed something to look at. Sarah looked at the ring in her palm. Then she looked at him. Yes, she said. I didn't ask yet. I know, she said. Yes. The wedding was in May, on the Sunday before Memorial Day, in the parking lot of Lila's diner, because Lila had the largest flat space in town that wasn't a road, and because, as Sarah said, it was the place where it had really started. Cole had offered the ranch outside of town, had mentioned the desert landscape, had mentioned a venue in Flagstaff. Sarah had said Lila's parking lot, and Cole had looked at her for a moment and said, of course. They married in front of 200 people, which was remarkable given that Dolan's population was 1,200, until you understood that significant portions of those 1,200 had been waiting for this particular event since approximately November. Lila catered. Gerald served as an usher, an assignment he treated with the gravity of a military operation. Marco was the ring bearer, which his mother cried about for 3 days in advance. Pat brought Senator, who wore a bandana and behaved perfectly. Sarah wore a dress the color of the desert in afternoon light, a warm amber that made her look, as Lila said, like you belong here, which was the highest compliment Lila knew how to give. Cole wore the same clothes he always wore, clean and pressed, which anyone in Dolan could have told you was the most honest thing about him. The vows they exchanged were the standard ones because neither of them was precious about ceremony. What they had said to each other on the highway pull-off in the amber light of an October afternoon was the real version. The ceremony was for Dolan, and Dolan was generous in its response. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," the cheer that went up from 200 people in a parking lot on Route 66 was the kind of sound that carries. 40 miles of desert heard it. 3 passing truckers honked their horns in solidarity without knowing why. At the reception, which lasted until midnight and involved dancing in the street and Lila running out of food twice and replenishing it both times, a man stood up to make a toast. It was Marco's father, who had come in from Tucson for the wedding and had never met Cole or Sarah before that day. He was not a naturally eloquent man, which was what made his toast memorable. He said, "My son had an ear infection for 3 months, and my wife was managing it herself because we couldn't always make the drive. And now my son is fine, and my wife isn't scared anymore, and I don't really know what else to say except thank you, and I hope you're very happy, because this town was missing something before you two were in it." He sat down. Cole and Sarah looked at each other across the table. Sarah was not going to cry. She had not cried since the hearing room in Flagstaff, and she had made a private decision about this. She cried anyway. Cole handed her a napkin from Lila's, plain white paper, with Lila's Diner printed on it in the same cursive as the sign. She kept it. The clinic on Carrillo Street is still open. It has seen over 3,000 patients in the years since Sarah Reeves walked into Dolan on a cold November night, with a medical bag and 47 rejections and the particular stubborn knowledge of who she was. It has a second examination room now, added in the second year. It has a part-time physician who drives from Flagstaff 2 days a week. It has a waiting room with a painting on the wall that Marco made when he was 12, a motorcycle on a desert road. The kind of painting a 12-year-old makes when he wants to say something important and doesn't have the words yet. The flag on Sarah's nursing file was removed 8 months after the hearing. She received the notification on a Tuesday, which she has come to think is the correct day for things to finally come right. Cole still chairs the clinic's board. He still rides the Burgundy Road King on Sunday mornings, though now Sarah rides beside him on a bike that is no longer borrowed, a matte black Sportster she chose herself, which tells you everything about how much she's changed and everything about how much she hasn't. Dolan's population is 1,340. It has been growing for 3 years. In the Museum of Route 66 History in Williams, there is a small exhibit on communities that kept the road alive through the lean decades. Dolan is in it. There is a photograph of the clinic on Carrillo Street, and a photograph of Cole and Sarah on their motorcycles at the highway pull-off, where you can see the full sweep of the valley. The caption reads, "Some towns survive because someone decides they're worth returning to." In the parking lot of Lila's Diner, there is a small marker now. Nothing dramatic, just a rectangle of polished stone set into the asphalt near the spot where the ceremony was held. It was Lila's idea. It says, "Cole and Sarah Navarro were married here on the 21st of May. They made this town believe in itself again." That's a kind of history, too. Sarah passes it every morning on the way to the clinic. She never stops to look at it because she doesn't need to. It's not the marker she carries with her. What she carries is simpler. A ring on her finger, a stethoscope in a worn black bag. The particular knowledge, earned through 14 months of being told she wasn't enough, that she was always exactly enough, and that the road you walk alone in the dark sometimes leads you precisely where you were meant to arrive. Forever and always. That's how history gets made. Not in grand gestures, in someone stopping on a dark road, in a plain white card on a red vinyl table, in a building that waited for the right person, in a town that learned to believe in itself again because two people decided it was worth the effort. That's all it takes. That's everything it takes.